But one guy, Jeff, that was really surprising. I mean, I think everybody just expects that Kyle Larson is going to win this race as soon as they start it every year because he's so good on dirt. And that's like, as good as he is in a stock car, he's obviously one of the greatest dirt drivers really in the world. Kyle Larson wins the first stage, kind of inexplicably just loses the handle, I guess, through stage 2. And then stage 3 loses it by himself and then gets taken out by Ryan Preece, who claimed he got loose and was just trying the high line like Kyle Larson, but they had an instance earlier in the race, an incident where Priest had hit the wall. Let's start with, what did you make of this Kyle Larson Ryan Preece battle? Priest said it wasn't intentional, but how did you see it?
I mean, just racing, you know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of emotion. It's a lot. People get mad. People get happy. It's just an emotional sport. I feel like, I think Priest overreacted a little bit. I thought he went a little bit far in it, but at the same token, he's fighting for his life. I mean, he's trying to, he's in a position that he's wanted to be in his entire life, and he's fighting to keep it. And so there's a sense of, I got to get it done now. There's a sense of, if I don't get it done, what am I going to do? And that's a ton of pressure. That's a ton of, emotions going on there. And it's the hard part of the sport. It's the great part of the sport, is that it's you're fighting for your life. And so I think when you take a step back and you look at it from that perspective, you can understand, like, they got off to a really good start. You think about, how good he ran at the Coliseum. But it's, other than that, it's been a little bit of a struggle, and he needs to perform, and he's like, hey man, I can't get running the wall. I can't let people run me in the wall. I can't let these things happen because it hampers my opportunity to further my career. And so I think the fans need to recognize and appreciate that's his perspective, and emotions get the better of all of us. But he's literally fighting for his life.
Yeah, and no question, this is his second and most likely last chance at a decent cup opportunity here. He's in a good ride. He's with a good team, and I'm sure he's feeling the pressure. I'm curious, though. He said afterward, hey, I didn't mean to wreck Kyle Larson. I was just running the high line. But his team, after he and Larson had their first dust up, his team kind of encouraged him to go get him. What did you make of that? And does the team bear any responsibility in maybe kind of inflaming the situation instead of calming the driver down?
The teams don't need to decide on how drivers are going to handle themselves. The drivers need to do that. I know that it's a team sport, but there's only one guy holding the wheel, and there's only one guy that has to make those decisions. And the team needs to stay the hell out of that, to be honest with you. It's emotional for everybody. We talked about, how Ryan's fighting for his life. Well, everybody on that team is. I mean, this is the life that you picked. And it's very pressure filled. And when you feel like somebody's taking away that opportunity, then it's emotional, and people respond to emotions differently. But it's in the best interest of everybody that just let the drivers work it out. We really don't need spotters. We don't need crew chiefs. We don't need other, parents or siblings or spouses or kids. We just don't need them influencing it. It needs to be the drivers dealing with it amongst themselves.
I want to get to that point, certainly, because I think that's been a topic of discussion here the last couple of weeks, is how should the drivers work these things out, and how should NASCAR get involved, or should they at all be involved in that process? But before we get to that, I just want to touch really quickly. This is not the first time Kyle Larson has gotten into something with another driver, both this year and really, if you go back to last year, he's had a few instances where he's gotten sideways with guys, and guys have sort of taken umbrage at the way he is racing them. How would you describe Kyle Larson in terms of his reputation, in terms of the way he races people? I think we all look at him and think, well, he's a champion. He's one of the best drivers in the world. I don't think we often think of him as like a really aggressive driver, but does his style kind of put him, or maybe his talent put him in situations where he's more likely to sort of be at loggerheads with other drivers?
Yeah, Nate, what happens in this sport is we tend to think of aggressive drivers as drivers that are running into other drivers all the time, okay? Jimmy Johnson was an exceptionally aggressive race car driver because he attacked the racetrack. And people will say, well, Jimmy wasn't aggressive because he didn't run into people that much. He was on edge all the time. Like, he was pushing and attacking the racetrack at all times. And when you do that, you're going to make some mistakes from time to time. And so with Jimmy, we would see it where typically, for the most part, he would spin out. I mean, Jimmy Johnson was not afraid to wreck. He was not afraid to spin out. He made a lot of mistakes because he operated on the edge a lot. And so when I think of Kyle Larson, that's what I think about. I don't think about a guy that's out there aggressively knocking, intentionally running into people, intentionally moving people out of the way. He's pushing that car to its very edge. And when you do that and people are around you, sometimes you're going to get tangled up with them. I don't think he's a dirty driver. I don't think that he's anything like that. I just think that he's pushing and trying to make lap time and trying to go as fast as he can. And that is going to put him in a position where from time to time, he's going to make people angry.
So that's sort of the fine line there between, he's not, to quote another driver who obviously had a famous moment at Bristol involving this quote, rattling other people's cages. That's not really what Larson is doing. It's just sort of a byproduct of how he races.
Who was that?
Yeah.
Look, when you're fast and you're winning races and you're constantly running up front, drivers don't like that. They want to be that guy. And that's just how it is. And that's how it should be. And so when you got a guy like that that's fast and you have a problem with him, it rubs you wrong. But I don't view Kyle Larson as a guy that the garage has a problem with. I mean, not even close to it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's good insight. So you touched on it, Jeff. How drivers work things out between each other has been a topic of discussion the last couple of weeks. Of course, this goes back to Phoenix, where Denny Hamlin had his incident with Ross Chastain on the final lap. Came out on a podcast the next day and said, I put Chastain in the wall, essentially, because of the way he's raced me. I forced him to make a choice, either back out or I'm taking you in the wall with me. NASCAR didn't like that. They gave Denny Hamlin a points penalty. I would suspect, based on what happened with Preece and Larson from Bristol, that the Preece incident certainly will be reviewed. Where do you kind of view the lines right now in terms of the state of retaliation or policing each other for drivers and the way NASCAR sees that right now?
I'd say it's blurry. I think that, there's a couple of different ways that NASCAR or any sanctioning body can go about this. And if you think about, and I'm, thinking about F1, right? Where if two drivers have a situation, they're reviewing it and they're going to make a call. I got some issue with that because that's not our culture. That's not what NASCAR racing has been built on. So that's over policing, in my eyes. That's over policing the sport in regard to NASCAR. There are times when there are blatant situations where somebody does something. Bubba Wallace, he and Kyle Larson. That's those kind of moments NASCAR needs to step in. Like you can't have that. At that point, NASCAR needs to step in. In the middle is the problem, right? Like Denny Hamlin's situation where, he came out and he said what he said. And it's still like, if you really listen to what he said, he really never said, I just intentionally wrecked the guy. Like,
right.
It's a little fuzzy. And so I don't really want NASCAR involved in it. I think they have to get involved in it when it's severe. If you go down this road of NASCAR being involved in everything, then NASCAR is going to be involved in everything. And that's different than where we've been. Although it's a bit of a yo-yo. It's a little bit up and down. I think we need to decide who we're going to be and be that. And it's hard for NASCAR. It's hard for the drivers because you have a lot of different opinions about how NASCAR should police the sport. Typically it's been, look, we're going to let you guys handle it. If it gets out of hand, we're going to step in. But where's that line? And so it's fuzzy, but I think it's always been fuzzy. I mean, I think it's always been, how many years ago was it that Ricky Rudd spun out? He spun out Davey, right?
Yeah, Sonoma. I think that was 92 maybe, or late 80s maybe, somewhere around there. Yeah.
And they penalized Ricky Rudd for that. But how many other times did somebody else spin somebody for the win and it didn't penalize? Like, so this isn't new.
Right.
But I do think that every so often we need to decide as an industry, what are we going to be, and just be it. I go back to Matt Kenseth and Joey Logano at Martinsville. Like, Matt Kenseth deserved to be penalized. But did Matt Kenseth have any idea the penalty was going to be as big as it was? Did he have any reason to believe that that's how big the penalty was? Like, where was the precedence for that? Like, he deserved to be penalized, but at that degree? And that's just an example of how the more everybody is on the same page and understands what it is that we're going to do and how we're going to do it, the better we're going to be. And I get nervous. I get nervous with the over policing of the sport, or what I consider to be over policing of the sport. But I will tell you, there's drivers that believe that there should be more policing. There's drivers that believe that it should be less.
Yeah.
And it was the same way 15 years ago, and 15 years before that, and 15 years ago before that. And I just don't know how this is a problem that's ever going to not go away, because Nate, it's not a cut and dry sport. It's not. You're either inbounds or you're out of bounds. It's not. And so that makes it harder to police.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is not been covering NASCAR for 20 years, and this is certainly not the first time this discussion has come up. It is cyclical, like almost everything in racing. But, you mentioned that some drivers would like to see more. I'll give you an example. I mean, Kyle Busch said the day before the Bristol Dirt Race in a media availability at the track, he said that he thinks they should start penalizing drivers and send it by sending them to the back of the field, short track style, if they do things like Christopher Bell taking out William Byron at Richmond. Like, it seems as if there's almost like this growing chorus that I haven't heard before of people asking for NASCAR to step in when guys are spun or wrecked in that sort of way. Is that ever something NASCAR should do, or do you think that would fly at all in the Cup Series? Or
I had a wise man tell me one time, a great racer told me, if you don't make people do the right thing, they never will.
Yeah.
However, where I struggle is where the culture of our sport, what part of that do you hold on and what part of that do you let go of it? And our fan base expects to see side-by-side, door-to-door action. And it's impossible to ask the drivers to drive aggressively, to have double file restarts, to pay points at the end of stages, to do all those things, and then at the same token say, but you can't make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where I have a problem, is that we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in NASCAR is not a world in which, you push that car to the complete limit and things are never going to not have you're always going to make mistakes. And I think when you have a driver that consistently makes mistakes, I think that's when NASCAR needs to step in. I think when you have blatant things, Matt Kenseth, Bubba Wallace, there's some other ones, NASCAR needs to step in. But gosh, man, good hardcore racing in which two guys battling for the same spot, I don't know that we need to be penalizing those things.
Yeah. Well, going back to Kenseth, I mean, I get what you're saying, that like there was no sort of, it wasn't codified that like, hey, if you take out a championship guy in a playoff race, we're going to sit you for 2 laps. If he's leading the race, it's 40 to go and you're 9 laps down or whatever. Obviously the circumstances there were sort of very unique and the way Kenseth did it was unique. But when I look at that incident, I look at Bubba versus Kyle Larson at Kansas, and I look a little bit like what happened with Preece and Larson. Like, I look at all of those different from Hamlin versus Chastain, because Hamlin versus Chastain, Denny didn't end Ross's race. He made a choice to put Ross to a choice, and it was the last lap. I mean, to me, if you end a guy's race, it seems like then that's where consequences come into play. Like, I don't, maybe it's just me. I don't see a lot of merit in penalizing somebody for making intentional contact if it's just part of hard racing and it's not necessarily like you spun them or you crashed them.
Yeah, and again, you go back to the culture of our sport, and Dale Earnhardt saying, "I didn't mean to wreck him. I meant to rattle his cage." Well, okay, you meant to hit him, like,
Yeah.
like you know what I mean. And how many times do we play that over and over and over? And so then how do we play that and market that and say, no, you can't do that?
Yeah.
Like how do you do both?
Right.
And so that's what's difficult about this, is that I don't think we can have a sport in which it's just always has to be clean. If not, somebody's got to be penalized. I think that there's times you need to penalize people, but if we're going to penalize people for rattling their cage, then we need to quit playing the damn commercials.
Yeah,
like you can't have it both ways, right? And so, but again, this is not a new discussion. Like, this discussion has happened forever. NASCAR typically has said, hey, you guys, I mean, we had a whole boys have at it damn thing, and so typically it's been, we're going to try to stay out of it and you guys work it out. And typically that's worked okay. Yeah. And sometimes it's not. I don't, there's just no right answer. Racing's going to happen. Drivers are going to get mad at each other. People are going to be disrespectful to each other from time to time. And NASCAR has to have the wisdom to step in when it's appropriate and the wisdom to not when it's appropriate. But everyone needs to be on the same page about what's appropriate and what's not.
Hi, I'm Parker Kligerman. For more access like this from Pit Road, be sure to click and subscribe to the Motorsports on NBC YouTube channel.